Welcome to part 2 of effective communication in the workplace. A really fun topic, one that's near and dear to my heart. I'm Carrie, and we have the fabulous Kelly working in the wings today. So any tech issues, thoughts, feelings, anything like that, feel free to shoot those her way. Kelly is one of our new friends here at WEM, and we're so excited to have her on board and as part of our team. You'll be hearing from her a tiny bit today and seeing her shortly in our upcoming workshops, which, in case you hadn't noticed, we have many coming up. And for those of you that were on Tidbit Tuesday this morning, you'll know that we have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity coming up next month with Customer Service Month. So if you're in the position, the reason we did it in February, just like spoiler alert here, is to access some of those new hires that you'll be onboarding, and even for yourself, gathering up some of that information that maybe has been dampened along the way. Is that a fair term? Sometimes we lose some of our mojo along the way when it comes to customer service. We know, though, that we work and live and shop globally. What sets us apart is amazing customer service. Now, if you were to ask me, Carrie, what is customer service? And I would say, hello, it's effective communication. And so I'm so excited that you're here for this particular workshop series with Rochelle, leading us through all the amazing things to learn about with communication, which we know as savvy communicators that this is what makes us amazing. This is what sets us apart. We think about the relationships that we have in our lives, both in and outside of work, in our volunteer capacities, in our communities, and in our homes. Guess what makes the diff? Communication. What is customer service? Yes, it's communication. You guys know that, and so welcome. Now, at Workplace Education Manitoba, you know, we're helping people develop essential skills needed for work, learning, and life. And of course, we talked about this in great detail last week, of course, hitting on our fan favorite of oral communication. We would also like to express appreciation to the following for supporting the development of this continuous learning skills curriculum, because without them, this wouldn't be funded. So we're looking at a big fat thank you. A clap emoji would be wonderful at this point, or some sort of indication as a gratitude to Employment and Social Development Canada, Manitoba Education Training, as well as Human Resource Skills Development Canada, and Entrepreneurship Training and Trade. And for more information, our flagship website, wem.mb.ca. Now, our vision, and this is important for us, we love at WEM connecting with our vision. So our vision is to provide all Manitobans with access to the essential skills, knowledge, and training required to determine and pursue their goals related to, guess what, learning, the workplace, and life. All of the things, all of the time. So that also helps us as discussion facilitators to remember why we do what we do. And I think if nothing else, we can take that away from today in effective communication and a quick sniff at our customer service. It's not always what we're doing, but why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And so I'd like to invite the lovely voice of Kelly to hop in and introduce our wonderful, brilliant instructor today.
Well, hello, everyone. I know you can't see my face. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but this is my voice. It's Kelly. So you guys already maybe have heard, if this is your second time joining, your second week joining with Rochelle, but you've seen Rochelle. She's amazing. She's been engaged in the educational setting for over 20 years, and she has been an essential skills instructor with WEM. She's not a stranger to learning, though. Maybe some of you didn't catch it last week, but she is actually, she's continuing to increase her capacity as a student because she's actually completing her graduate degree in leadership. So that's amazing. I think we all should give her a hand for that. She's doing that and all of this adding value to everybody here. Yeah, she's amazing. But you know, when she's not seen here teaching essential skills or studying for leadership, you can find her cheering on her favorite little athletes in the hockey rink or the baseball diamond in, maybe even drinking a hot tea. Maybe someone brought you a hot tea. I'm not sure, Rochelle. But definitely she's always thinking about her next inspirational workshop. So I am going to hand the mic and the camera over to you, Rochelle. And I'm really excited for this second session here because it's something that I love to always keep learning about. So take it away, Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Carrie. Emojis for these people. You guys make it so fun to gather and to learn. Remember when we were kids and we used to say we hated school and now we wish we could be back in school? You guys would be like game changers in the classroom for students. You make it so people want to be here and learn. So thank you, Kelly and Carrie, and a huge welcome. And thank you everyone for joining in. I know a couple of you were with us this morning for our tidbit, and I'm so glad you were, because exactly what Carrie said, 120,000%. It's that whatever we're trying to accomplish in customer service or in business, it's always coming back to this communication piece, right? That's always the success or the barrier, is how good is the communication. And have you ever been in a little tiny town somewhere where you find this absolute treasure in a little gift shop or a little homemade restaurant? I know I was up in Arborg in 2020 and I found a little place to eat that I was like, this is a treasure. So show me an emoji if you've had that feeling where you're like, I did not know this was here. I've just stumbled on a little bit of a gold mine in small town, wherever, right? And what's one of the things we all say? How did I not know about this? Right? You probably said that. How did I not know? Or remember the first time my sister brought me these gourmet donuts are a thing, right? So she brought me a gourmet donut to try. And I'm like, yeah, donut's a donut. And then I'm like, oh, how did I not know about this? Well, all these feelings of like we have this product or we have a solution or an experience we want to share, it always comes down to communication and how to get that out to people. So bravo to all of you who are digging in and doing the journey with us over these 3 sessions. Now let's look back at last week. I know you got to dig deep. Who has their week 1 notes with them? Do you have your notebook with you from last session? Take a quick peek through there and let me know what was one of the things that sort of resonated for you, or you thought about in a new way, or you thought, oh yeah, I knew that, but I want to beef up on that. I want to do that a little more. One of them for me was the clarifying questions that I just constantly have to bring myself back to that, to ask the clarifying questions, to find out, do we have shared information? And as you look through that workbook, you'll see that we did that journey to talk about what some of the barriers are in the environment and among people with communicating with each other. We talked about the importance of questions, empowering questions, open-ended questions versus closed, and using them for the right meetings and in the right context. And we were just starting to get into the ideas of active listening when our session was ending. So I've taken that last bit of workbook 1, the last 2 pages and exercises, and I've moved them in to the beginning of today's workbook. So we're going to pick up right where we left off. And one of the best reflections that came forward was from the people who were able to share some of their real life experiences on those barriers to effective communication. Now, I know with an emoji button, you could show me how many have lived on the receiving end of ineffective communication. Like, I'm trying to understand what you're saying, but I don't understand. Is there any other way you can explain this to me? Oh, see, I feel the tears emoji.
Rochelle, I hate to do this to you. Can I hop in with a story really quick?
Please, I would love it.
Okay, so I have talked about my partner before, and he and I are incredibly different. Sorry, I just laugh because, like, I'm like, yeah. And Rick's like, interesting, concerned eyebrows, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, picture it, Saturday, amazing day for skiing lessons, right? So that's what our daughter was doing. Boys were on the hill snowboarding. And Rick and I switched off because I want to go cross-country skiing. So all is well. Now, let me paint this picture a little bit clearer. Let's zoom in just a little bit more. Right? The place was totally packed. Really packed. Like, don't tell anybody, but it was really packed. And so it was causing some feelings for management and staff at how many people were there, which there's nothing I could control about that. I could control about where I was standing and making sure I wasn't jimmy jammed up against like 100 people, like what was happening. So anyway, so now we're outside. And I was standing at the top part of the hill because it's fun to watch your kid learn a new skill. And anyway, so Rick and I do high five, trade off, and eventually I come home from my ski and I see him sitting on the couch and he's super grizzly, right? He's got like super grumpy voice. And I'm like, hey, what's wrong? Like, you're supposed to be happy all the time. Some person came up and he didn't even know if they were talking to him because they were like, you are standing in the totally wrong spot. You need to move. You are in the wrong spot. Okay, this is Rick's first time there, right? So like, what could have been done differently thinking about this idea of combining customer service and communication? So number one, maybe have a sign that says, don't stand here, right? It was awful. And so because of that, we had someone who's normally mild and well-mannered, because of miscommunication, totally turn their day. And so I explained, it's really stressful. Let's give a million reasons as to why someone could possibly be behaving this way. Anyway, yes, I think we've all, Rochelle, to your point, have been on the wonderful receiving end of terrible misput communication, both in person.
Oh, yes.
And on the computer as well. Okay, I'll be over here listening and laughing.
Well, to that, how about if I shout at you with the keyboard? Poor Rick. This is one of the frustrations in life, right? Where maybe you're the 100th person someone's had to give instructions to, but you don't know you're the 100th person, so they treat you like a piece of dirt. But the communication isn't all in the tone. Sometimes it's, I would stand where I need to stand if I knew where I needed to stand, or so on, right? So what was so cool about leaving the last session is several of you took the time to go ahead and respond to the question that was asked. So I've pulled some of the ones that were shared into this slide for you. So this is real life, real-time examples in all of our workplaces who are here today. None of these examples were pulled from anywhere else than our participants in this workshop. So a few people mentioned the idea of time and pace, that we're trying to communicate interdepartmentally in such a rushed way that we leave things unanswered or maybe feeling insignificant. And then conversely, it's that sometimes things hang too long and we don't get an answer or a response. And so there's a lot of validation issues that can be created because things are not addressed in a timely way. Too many communication platforms. Oh, the struggle's real. Should you email them? Should you chat them? Should you phone them? Should you text them? Should you web them? What is it? Do I need to create a paper trail? Who all needs to know? The platforms can be overwhelming, and anyone who did at-home learning with your children as the school was sending it out, you got to see that there were multiple platforms being used. And then, of course, working from home versus in the office, this changes communication, right? The people that you would get to interact with verbally, now in the pandemic, maybe you're not getting to interact with them verbally or in person casually, and that really changes things because a lot of the real business happens at the quote water cooler, where we just pick things up in the workplace accidentally, and then it makes a better understanding for everyone. Of course, bad technology. Oh, can we just see like the sad emoji if this is part of your reality? That maybe your internet gets slow or your computer bogs down, and then it wrecks communication because you're limited by your own technology. This is a story, and I won't tell you my story, but that's so real for so many of us. And people with varying levels of knowledge is a huge barrier, right? Because sometimes we come into a conversation or a project knowing why something didn't work when we did that before. And so we know why we abolished that project. But if someone comes in with a different level of knowledge, they don't know and they want us to reinvent the wheel. So this can be huge. Shared spaces, it's a thing where, if you're working in cubicle environment and so on or not, it has pros and cons both ways, either being isolated in offices or productive in offices, or sharing, I maybe need to have a conversation, not even with a coworker. It doesn't even have to be bad, but how many of you ever had to do cold calling or sales calls where you have to call out and try to initiate a sale or a customer relationship? Thank you. I feel your pain, Dana. I have too. And when you do that, it's actually hard to do that in a shared space. Can I get a witness? Like it's difficult to be putting yourself out there while you're in this audience of 12 people at fellow cubicles observing your cold calling. And then strong body language. I really appreciated someone who said this, that often people are sharing or exuding body language that is not true to the words that they're saying, and it can be habitual. In fact, I worked with someone who used to have body language. They would change their body language to be very open. They didn't look closed arms. They had the total opposite message happening. And whenever they did that, I learned after a little while of working with them that whenever they did that, I knew a big, huge no was about to come. There was a big, fat no coming. When they intentionally made their body language open, I knew their mind was closed. It's very funny how it works. And then, of course, job descriptions. We don't know what we're supposed to do, who's supposed to do it, and it affects the chain of command. And someone ends up getting offended over something that nobody knew was a problem because the communication piece. So I just, with Carrie, thank you for sharing these, everybody, because these are not only true real life examples, but these are right where all of us are at in our group today. And so we'll see as we go through that we need to acknowledge these pieces because these are very real barriers and figure out workarounds. And I just want to throw it out there that this would be the type of tool you may want to share with a supervisor or a coworker. So when you're describing some of the different realities in the space that you're in, you're able to give practical examples of all the stresses. This is what, 9. There's 9 different things here that in one workday could be 9 causes of stress, and we haven't even gotten to bigger interpersonal issues yet, right? We just have 9 practical things that come on us as stressors. So these are practical things to be able to problem solve. If you work with problem solving focused people, these are things that can be addressed. And would we want to? The big question, is it even worth the effort? Well, it's only worth the effort when we know what would happen if we did do it and what would happen if we didn't do it. We do a benefit versus risk analysis, right? Is it worth the effort? And if we look at some of the risks, these should scare us into doing it, right? We know that poor communication in the workplace causes all of these things. Probably the biggest one that we've all felt would be near the bottom, the one that talks about morale, where we see how negative morale impacts employee turnover and client engagement. So we know we essentially lose people, whether we lose them in their heart and their mind and they're just a shell of a person sitting in a desk, or whether we lose them as an actual coworker or client. We know that morale can sometimes be the biggest risk. Love this quote, good communication is as stimulating as black coffee and just as hard to sleep afterwards. And that really can only happen when all the players involved are working from the same set of rules or working from the same set of values. And so some of the things that you'll learn in last week's session and leading up, especially next week, we're going to talk about some conflict stuff next week, the tough conversations and working with different personalities. And when we're talking about those hard things, some of these pieces are ones to put on the staff meeting agenda. Like, we want to talk about this. What are our shared values or rules or realities or obstacles for communication in our space? So today, let's do some diving into who we are and how we are wired so we can understand how to have a shared experience. Now, do not confuse the word information with communication. They're two totally different things. And as you can see, maybe even jot this one down. Information, according to Sydney Harris, is about giving out, but communication is about getting through. This resonates with our point we emphasized last week, that it's not communicated when you say it, only when the other person gets it. Because of course it's that two-part relationship, right? It really takes two people, the speaker and the hearer. And we're not just talking about oral communication. This applies to written and technology-based communication pieces and even nonverbal body language. It does take two to be able to offer and interpret. So in the getting it right, and having our team members understand our values and our instructions, sometimes we have to get them to confirm what it is they heard. And so we will look into clarifying and confirming values. And before we do, I just want to take a peek into the story that I referred to last week. Now, we do talk about positivity. In fact, we have a positivity tidbit that's going to come up again this spring, and we talk about positive mindset, mental modes, and ways to use positive communication in the workplace. That's a value to us here at WEM. It's a value that helps keep the machine going, but it's a value that extends really to every industry. And I wanted to share with you this story because sometimes we think we get it all right when we check all the boxes. I wasn't yelling. I had the meeting at a good time. It was respectful. There's nothing I said that is out of check. So I checked all the boxes. And we can't figure out why we still didn't get it right. And so I submit to you today that according to Coos and Posner, they have this book called The Leadership Challenge. And it's an interesting enough book, but one of the stories in particular jumped out at me about communication, because it's not just about checking the boxes. It's about actually making sure we're doing it with positivity or a mindset that creates an environment that people can thrive within. They start by saying, here's their story time. Constituents look for leaders who demonstrate an enthusiastic, genuine belief in the capacity of others, who strengthens people's will and supply the means to achieve and express optimism for the future. Naysayers stop progress, they do not start it. But in today's uncertain times, leaders with a positive, confident, and can-do approach to life are desperately needed. Consider the story of a fellow named Ari Ashkenazi, where he describes his contrasting experience with two different supervisors. The first supervisor, he said, always tried to keep spirits up and look on the bright side, regardless of the situation. Even when a certain project came out with less than desired results, Ari said that she would tell them that future projects would turn out better as long as they kept working hard and working smart. Ari reported, "This gave me a lot of faith in her, and it helped to keep me from getting frustrated during my work when things didn't always go right. It also had the effect of making it easier for me to try new things, as well as to report negative news to her that she would need, because I knew she wouldn't shoot the messenger when it came to giving her news." And then Ari described another supervisor who would often get easily exasperated. And when she was annoyed or angry, she would let you know it quite plainly. All she cared about was focusing on solid numbers and solid results. And it felt as though she looked down on you if things didn't go quite as planned right from the start. The outcome of the negative communications, Ari explained, was to make me try to avoid her as much as possible and to hold back on giving her negative information that she needed to know just because I feared the backlash that she would give me. Okay, so get this. So we've got Ari. Ari's had a positive supervisor, negative mindset supervisor. With both, he's starting to weigh out that with the positive mindset person, I even could tell them the bad things that might hurt them because in the end it would help them. But with the negative mindset person, I started to shrink away from them. So check out this research, okay? Researchers working with neural networks have documented that Ari's feelings in finding that when people feel rebuffed or left out, the brain activates a site for registering physical pain. People actually remember downbeat comments far more often, in greater detail, and with more intensity than they will encouraging words. And when negative remarks become a preoccupation, an employee's brain loses mental efficiency. This is all the more reason for leaders to be positive. And then the study goes on to say that in contrast, the positive approach in mentality broadens people's ideas about future possibilities, and it creates a synergy where those options start to build on each other. In fact, it opens up people's minds, making them more receptive and more creative. So she's got another whole paragraph on how innovation is tied to whether we can not only communicate clearly, but can we do it with positive messaging. So if we knew that our inventions and our productions were directly related to our mindset, whoa, then we're not just trying to check boxes on, did I say it right? Is there anything I can just make sure I checked all the boxes on? No, it's just revolutionizing the amount of innovation that can happen in a workplace. So for our part on recognizing how do I ensure that my message is understood as intended, it's recognizing as a hearer and as the speaker, I want to give time for clarification and confirmation. So in your workbook on page 2, it does walk you through an exercise of what the clarifying and confirming things feel like and look like. This would be a great one to do with a coworker because you want the honest coworker to tell you what your questions sound like. And sometimes we ask a closed-ended question like, did I just say da-da-da-da? Well, that's a yes or no. So why not work through this experience on page 2 with someone on your team who will be honest with you. And maybe they'll tell you that when you ask a clarifying question like, if I understand what you're saying, maybe you sound snooty when you say it. You don't mean to, but maybe you do. And maybe there's another way you can say it so that your team will be able to receive the question from you or not. And those reflective responses that we have on page 3, it's really being able to take the information you're given and repeat it back in a helpful way to make sure you understand. Now, this is important when risk is involved. Sometimes your supervisor might ask you to just solve a problem. They don't care what it costs. They don't care how long it takes. They don't care if you work overtime. They're like, I just need you to put out the fire. So reflective responses are super important during that because we're able to say, I feel like you're experiencing a lot of stress, and the way that I can help take that off your plate is if I solve this problem and just report back to you with a written report on how everything went when we were done. So reflective responses can save your bacon in a time of crisis, which we will talk about next time. Will be all about crisis. So take some time with a friend who's honest with you in the workplace, or maybe even a partner or roommate who will say, here's what you sound like when you say those things, or here's the pitfalls you can avoid. Great quote by Charles Dickens that really what we all have in common is that we're all a mystery to each other. Kind of a sad thing to all have in common, right? Because that means we have a lot of figuring out to do. So it starts with understanding ourselves. Now I'm going to give you a minute, and I don't want you to overthink this. This is all about gut reaction. You're going to take some time on page 4 of your workbook, and with either a highlighter or a pen, go through and look at what are my personal communication strengths, and circle or highlight a handful of the ones that you think, yep, these are me, I'm good at these. Go ahead and do it. I'm going to give you a few seconds. Power through page 4. Okay, show me an emoji if you have some strengths. Anybody out there have a strength? I hope it wasn't just active silence. Isn't that fun? You realize, man, I'm different than other people. I have some strengths. Well, let's be real and realize the reason we have them is because we're not all cookie cutter people. We have differences. So I'm going to give you a few seconds and do the same thing. Switch up your color of your highlighter or pen if you want, and go through and gut reaction, pull out the ones that you think, ugh, I know I'm not the greatest at this. So we're on page 5 and go for it. Circle some of your weaknesses. Okay, how about with an emoji? Show me if you have any weaknesses. Anybody got them? You just go ahead and start writing all your weaknesses in the chat, okay? We don't want to hear strengths. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm not going to do that to you. I promise. Now, here's something you can do after we close today that you might find interesting. The question at the bottom of page 5 says, were there any overlaps in responses on pages 4 and 5? So, for example, if you want to, I'll give you a personal example. I'll throw myself out there as the, the strength weakness here. Friendliness. I don't have a super hard time being friendly. I've practiced it, so I like to be friendly to people. It's sort of one of my core values on helping people experience things. Well, that's a weakness too. Because sometimes I work in a retail environment, and when I do, friendliness can sometimes slow down production So maybe I want my customers to feel so loved and appreciated and known that I can slow it down a little bit. So I want you to go through and look at, hey, is sometimes maybe my greatest weakness an opportunity for strength? Is there a strength there hiding? Or is it actually the same as one of my strengths, and I haven't fully learned how to manage it in my particular workplace or for this scenario? And we know that we wear multiple hats. We're not the same person at the office as we are making supper, as we are from our second job or our sport. We know that we wear so many different hats. And so maybe some of those strengths and weaknesses emerge depending on who we're working with, because they're a different person with those things emerging also. So a good reminder from Ernest Hemingway is to think about how we really can't get away from that core of how we're wired and who we are and what skills we've developed along the way just by running away. We see this with people running workplace to workplace, right? The going gets tough, the communication gets tough, we have a big breakdown, so we leave that job and we go to where the grass is greener. And then about a year into it, the grass isn't greener anymore, and there's some other jerk that we work with, and so we have to run away and go to another workplace. So if there's been this habit that relationally I keep bumping into people and it always ends disastrously and people just don't understand me, maybe the common denominator is that there's a little bit I can tweak in my own communication skills and some things that I can jump in and change. And yeah, great question, Carrie. Is it possible that there's something here someone's not telling me? Is it possible there's a common denominator of me? And I think I shared it very briefly in another session. But as it relates to communication, one of my best friends is somebody who I hated when I met them. Hated might be a little strong, but we were forced to be college roommates against our will. And we, and not Carrie, but we were forced into this environment of college roomies, and we just clashed all the time. And I would never have believed it that years later, she ended up being one of my bridesmaids in my wedding, very close, dear friend. Confessions exposed, ... No, Carrie, I just haven't told you yet how I really feel. So what I learned from that relationship with that roommate is that a common denominator was happening with me. When a certain personality type came too much into my world, it brought out the worst in me. And so I had to do some deep change on my communication style because I couldn't just keep running away. And then the possibilities are fantastic about who ends up connecting with you. So in a lot of ways, it really begins with mutual respect, communication that inspires, and encouraging others to do their best. This is a tough one because sometimes we want to think that effective communication is about how we give a message and not so much about how we empower someone. Karen, let's dig into your question a little bit about the best way to learn about these changes. I think maybe you're referring to this one, right? What's the best way to learn about the kind of changes I would need to make, right? So some of that is looking at patterns of behavior. Thank you. A lot of that is in this particular workbook. And so today's has a lot of homework in it because you find that what you think your strengths and weaknesses are, when you share that with a trusted friend or colleague, and work through those active listening questions. And what are your habits? What are the ways that you clarify and confirm? Do they work? Maybe you find that you clarify and confirm in a way that doesn't work in your workplace. So having that humility to recognize that I don't just want to win, but it's this slide here that I want my communication to inspire someone else. It does take a lot of humility and even journaling to be able to see what are my hot buttons. Now we're going to touch on this right now on page 6. So your own listening barriers, what are those? Take a second here with page 6 And be really honest about rarely, sometimes, and often, because these ones touch on motive. So for example, the first question says, I'm interested in people and I do not tune them out, even when they're providing dry sounding information. Be honest. Do you find that's rarely true? You're always interested in people and you listen intently on everything they're saying? Or sometimes or often? So take a minute and look at your own listening barriers. The first place to figure out what you need to change is to be honest with yourself. The next place is to take this list to someone else on another day. So let's be honest with ourselves. Now that too, I'm going to let you keep private, because guess what? We all have those things. And so these are some of the barriers that we tend to get lost in, and whether that's us on the giving end or the receiving end. So it could be any one of these things where we don't literally understand what someone's saying because there's a language or a speech barrier that we're not familiar with, or predictive speech where we think we know what they're about to say, and then of course all the environmental distractions around us. So this is something, especially if you have that tough person that you really have a hard time getting along with, go through and check the boxes on the barriers and on these and evaluate, is it truly all them? Or is it possible that there's something I don't know or don't understand about their experience, or is there something about our environment that's contributing to these clashes? Who's heard this before? I love this one. There's a reason we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth. This is super hard for people who are verbal processors. I just want to say, I'm not saying. It can be really tough for us as verbal processors. So with that whole concept of listening more than we're speaking, please can you take that listening barrier piece and share it with someone else and ask them what they think the barriers are. I know for me, one of the ones that came up is my partner said to me, I can be easily distracted. I don't think it's true. I think he's wrong, but he said, no, you get distracted when we're talking about this or whatever. And he showed me what it is that communicates distraction. So I would not have seen it. I couldn't see it in the mirror. I was a little distorted like this kitty cat, but through sharing with someone else, it helps them give practical examples. And ways we can really strengthen that is when we're doing our clarifying and our listening, our intent should be to hear. Our intent would not be to be right. Our intent would not be to speak, but it's to actually hear what's being communicated. So not just waiting, is it my turn yet? This is a really important one that someone in our group brought up in their email, and I wanted to spend a moment on this. There are times that your physical environment at work is completely not conducive to the conversations that need to happen. So let's say you are the cashier at Costco and there's a bazillion people buzzing around all the time. Not a great environment to have a meaningful conversation with a supervisor or a coworker. Or let's say you made a mistake and you publicly made a mistake and humiliated by accident somebody who worked there because you somehow unmasked something they did. Going to them privately and apologizing may not be as effective as apologizing in front of coworkers who witnessed it all. And conversely, maybe the lunchroom and you're a loud talker is not the place to have the quiet conversation. So being able to build trust in your environment with people to say, hey, can we just go for a walk? Can we just pop outside for a minute? Just need a couple minutes. And do it in a way that doesn't create fear in the environment, but does provide people the ability to have the privacy and the physical space that they need. And it may not be the one you need. You might be quite comfortable having a private conversation, just the two of you, but maybe they need a support person, or maybe they need to walk and talk while they're doing it. So a lot of this onus is on us to not only accommodate the person we're with, but communicate our own needs that, hey, this isn't working for me in this environment. Can we take this somewhere else? Part of it comes with that openness on being willing to actually hear, not just looking for that little nugget that we want to jump on. And remember, we emphasized this last session, that checking for the shared understanding is on you as the hearer, and it really comes from trying to mine what the deeper meaning is. Because here's the thing, folks, really sometimes it's not what you've heard or what's been spoken, but it's you digging in, reading between the lines, as it were, for what is the reasoning behind what's being said. So maybe someone's going to just give me an instruction, but maybe behind that there's also not just a do this or do that instruction, but maybe they're also asking me to practice empathy or to consider things and so on. And here's the sad news. I'm sorry to break the news to you. Sad emoji. We never get to finish this. We're in school forever doing this, right? Because the people you work with today aren't the same people 10 years from now. And newsflash, even if they're the literal same people, they will change through their life also. So it's the different ages and stages and phases of not only your lives, but your company's life that recognizes communication changes and it grows. So building the rapport is the key piece with the team members. And so when I say take your listening barriers, take your strengths and weaknesses, take your active listening questions to a trusted colleague and ask them. In our fast-paced work environments, it feels like we don't have time for that. So even if you have to do it on your lunch break and give your own time up for that, you know what? People love talking about themselves. So if you give them a chance to do the same exploration about themselves, they'll help you to hear those things that you need to change also. Because getting our communication to its A game is really where success starts. Success doesn't start in the sales, doesn't start in those just the measurable goals. It happens a lot in that gray and fuzzy place of shared understanding. This fuzzy place of shared understanding is the place that creates community for colleagues and the customers. So if there's one thing that's going to help you to really take your communication to another level, it's really going to be about seeking clarity. And if you've been a customer, I'm sure you've been a customer, right? We've all been a customer. If you've been a customer where something disappointing happens, you're going to find that when you seek clarity, or when someone sought the clarity from you as the customer about what the problem is, and they actually understand what the problem is, it changes the whole message and it opens people up to possibilities. So the asking of the questions, creating the environment where it's safe to have that, it actually takes courage. And depending where you are in your workplace and how the communication zone is, you might be in the green zone where everybody's happy, everybody generally gets along pretty well. You might be in the red zone where anybody asks any question and somebody's got their back out already. You know, like wherever you are, it does take courage. And some of the things that are attached to not asking them are things that maybe we've perceived more than our actual reality, and maybe they're things that can be overcome instead of assuming they can never be overcome. Because if we were to measure what communication could do, we'd be able to measure that we're only 30% productive if we're not communicating properly. Now, this is why your supervisors and so on would say, yeah, take a communication class. It has payoffs. There's huge payoffs. This is the why and why they would say to do it. Well, here's what they are. Who doesn't want this? We want this with our coworkers. We want this with our clients. And not only does it bring a dividend, but here's a really interesting slide. One of the payoffs of positive communication is respect. But one of the foundations of positive communication is respect. So respect in the workplace is a little bit like a reciprocal thing. As you demonstrate it, it grows and it comes back to you in the culture that you're in. So this is one that you really want to ask the questions about in your office, in your workplace, on your team. What would respect actually look, feel, sound, and act like in our environment? It might feel like one thing to us as team members, but what does that real culture feel like for people coming in from the outside? What is it? What should it look like and feel like? And then, you know, based on comment cards and responses and interaction with the public, you know whether you're meeting the goal or not. Then what ends up happening is that problems and concerns becomes one of those dividends that gets solved in a positive way. And you can develop people. So not only can you work alongside them, but you can actually develop them and train them, and there become more opportunities ahead as we do it. Because at the end of the day, and we talked about this briefly in our customer service tidbit this morning, is really people want to be seen. They want to be known. They want to be understood. We want to be humans, right? We don't want to just be the number. We want someone to actually know what our needs, desires, and values really are. So when I approach other people, do I have certain biases that can affect communication? Because I know it can affect job performance. And if I don't have a sense of self-awareness, the best way to get it is not only in the daily reflections on how did things go at work today? Why did that happen? What was my role in that situation? But to be able to bounce those ideas off someone else. And if you don't have a trusted coworker that you can do that with a parent or a friend or whatnot. They'll appreciate a little bit of your bias because they're on your side, but they can help you see what they might have thought in that workplace also. Because they might know you enough to know what your trigger responses are. They might know you enough to help you move into a place where you can be aware of what your trigger responses are and how you can move forward into thoughtful action. And so the people who know you really well know what's going to trigger you and what's going to trigger poor communication out of you. Here's another assessment you can look at to think about blind spots. So I might have listening barriers, I might have communication weaknesses, and do I have any blind spots in terms of relationships and people around me? I'm going to give you a second here just to quickly read through that list, and this too should be a gut feeling. This isn't examining everyone you've ever met. You just go through your gut feeling. Am I a rarely, sometimes, often, or not sure on these categories? Go ahead and jump in on page 9. So the cool thing about this particular self-assessment is that just underneath those, the checkbox part, there's questions about how to improve your clarity and how to improve some of your self-assessment. So your own blind spots, that is. What would make the message clearer and more meaningful? Are there specific verbal descriptors needed? Well, you could relate these back to each of those blind spots or impediments you might have, and a great conversation piece with a team, because sometimes your team might be going through something. So let's just pick on one. The very last one on the list says, you could be frustrated with those who talk too much, maybe lots of times, some of the time, and so on. Well, this could actually be a reality in your workplace. Maybe you're at a call center and the calls are monitored in length of time and they're not supposed to exceed a certain time length. So this could be a shared blind spot that everybody has, that everybody's frustrated with people who talk too much. So that becomes the place where the steps to improve clarity make a great staff meeting, because you can say we have this shared experience in our department or in our company, and are there ways that we can logically communicate through that trouble spot that we're finding with those clients. So some good boardroom questions to ask the team are in there for you, and I hope you'll use them. And those are found there at the bottom of page 9. So going ahead and thinking, how do I improve the clarity, especially when I'm butting heads, especially when I have the blind spot? Here's questions you can ask. What would make the message clearer? What would make it resonate with someone? Are there verbal descriptors necessary to help with that picture? Was an opportunity provided for them to also ask clarifying questions, and is it structured and logical? Now, this is a key one because often we have visual learners and they need the visual, the hands-on, the demonstration, and so we have to take our time to be able to work through in a model that works with their learning style. Now, one example of ineffective communication is the fact that it's 11:59 and I'm not done my presentation yet. So some of you may need to go because 12 o'clock is approaching. And I just have a couple more thoughts I want to share with you before we part today. So I'm going to go ahead and share for the next 2 or 3 minutes. And if you have to go, I understand. And you can use this forever as an example of poor communication. But it's just too valuable that I want to be able to give it to you before we dig into the crisis and conflict conversations that we're going to have in our very next session and our final session next week. So this is mentioned in your workbook of understanding what is shared understanding and what is considerate of timing. Are we really thinking about the time and the space for this message? You know, if you sign a legal contract, you have 24 to 48 hours to recant your signature on that, because you have to be able to give people time to respond and think about it. So you can pull back a yes on a deal and say, actually, no, after sleeping on it and thinking about it, my answer is no. So even in our legal system, they give provision for timing. Do you give that in the workplace? Would that be true of you? So this quote by George Bernard Shaw, and this shows up in a few of our materials, is that the biggest deception, the biggest illusion in all of the communication problems is people think it happened. They think I said it, or I put up a sign, or it's clear as mud. What else is there to say? That's the biggest problem in communication. So remembering that we have a place of understanding, and a good customer service person actually knows how to ask back clarifying questions to say, I see you're disappointed, I understand we let you down, help me understand what went wrong, share with me what you're feeling and what we can do to help. And when we do this, we're not giving blame. Instead, we're giving a possibility for solutions. And it usually creates a sense of freedom and calm for the one who's so frustrated, right? The one who's so disappointed, so upset, so frustrated. They find freedom in being heard because of those clarifying questions. And this is the one I want you to camp out on. As we wrap up today, I have one other really fun quote for you, and then a little bit of journaling that you'll be able to go away and take care of on your own. How often is fear in the driver's seat? So when we're having communication road bumps, is fear ever there? Is it there that I might look stupid and I don't want to look stupid? I even hate the word stupid, but just being really candid, that is sometimes the fear of that in the driver's seat. Or is there an exposing that people feel where they think, am I supposed to know this? They're asking me for this, or this conversation's getting heated, and did I miss something? What am I supposed to know? Nobody filled me in, and the self-preservation panic sets in. So this is a key one to camp out on as we close today, because in our next session, when we talk about crises and going through some of the tough parts of communication, you have to know if you're having these trigger responses in your environment. So if somebody shouts at you, talks down to you, devalues you, what does it trigger in you? Automatically your own fear that you're not enough or that you've missed it, because getting a hold of that and getting your head around it and knowing the truths about the situation help put you into the place where you're able to use the right tools. Now, that whole concept of just not being afraid and not letting it touch on your biggest weaknesses, this shows up in this cool quote by a former CEO from McDonald's. He found that the best two qualities that a CEO can have are the ability to listen and to assume the best motive in others. And so often in the communication game, one of those is missing. I'm either not listening to what you need, or I'm assuming you're a jerk, and that's why we're having a conflict. Or I'm assuming that I can't meet your need, and so I'm just going to say no right from the beginning. So take this one away with you, jot it down in your workbook, and keep this one, because these two perspective pieces actually change who's in the driver's seat with communication and whether you can reach your tools or not. I was driving my sister somewhere, and it was so funny. She was in a vehicle she had never been in, and she went to reach something off the dash, and as she went to reach it, she was like, and trying to grasp this thing but couldn't get it, because she didn't know that in that vehicle the seatbelt locks as soon as you move at all. So she just looked like, you know, she was bungee jumping back and forth in this seat trying to reach something off of the dash, and she's like, I didn't know the seatbelt was like this. And I'm watching this happen, I'm thinking, this is exactly what happens in communication when we don't do what Jack Greenberg says. We go to reach for something and do it, and we get jolted back and surprised that we can't break through. And it's probably because we have not assumed the best motive in the situation, that everyone's going to be able to win to some degree, either now or in the long run. So that's a real key one to take away. And then, of course, you get to rate your own communication style. So we love to talk about ourselves and think about how great we are at something. Well, on page 10, you get to do that. And this is your takeaway homework before we reconvene. Now, if you get time, I would love for you to do this assessment and share with me some of your thoughts. I'm going to pop my email in here for you. The ones who were able to share with us last session on those listening barriers, it was so valuable because it's real life, and it showed that you're able to take what you're learning and interpret it into something for your workplace. Well, can you do that with this workbook this week? Can you take some time today, even 30 minutes to go through this would just boost your game, so that when we come into the next session, when we're talking about crises and conflicts, we know who we are. Once we know that and we cover those foundation pieces and we have some personal self-management at play, then we're able to handle the super huge challenge ahead of us. So that's your page 10 homework. And if you please could email me, because I just don't have enough email in life. I'd love more. No, truly. These concepts on what is your reflection teaching you? What is your reflection showing you about the people you work the closest with? And what's a tool or a trick that you took away and that you want to change or do something with? You're going to be propelled into like first place when we talk about crises, because then you'll say, I know who I am, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm capable of. I can handle this communication challenge. So with that, I want to say thank you. I'll let Carrie come back on and close us off for today. My big apology for going a bit over time today, but thank you so much for being willing to stay with us and learn these things together with us as lifelong learners.
Rochelle, thank you. You always bring such a real life to this topic. And thank you, everybody, for your comments. I invite you to complete the assignment that Rochelle has requested. It is of great value, and like she said, it'll just up your game. All right, take care, everybody. Have a great week. Stay safe, and we'll see you next Tuesday.